A significant severe weather outbreak is expected today across portions of the Midwest and Great Lakes, featuring the potential for several strong to intense tornadoes, as well as a potential significant derecho of winds up to 100 miles an hour later this afternoon into the evening hours. So anyways, let's get straight into this weather forecast. First of all, look at the current day 1 SPC severe weather outlook for today. You can see we now have a moderate risk of severe weather across northern Illinois, extreme southern Wisconsin, back into southeastern Iowa, and our enhanced risk of severe weather extends from northern Missouri and eastern and central Iowa back into much of the lower peninsula of Michigan. Looking at our tornado risk for today, we have a 15% tornado risk across southeastern Iowa and northern Illinois, and we do have a Sig 2 area across most of that area, where you can see several strong to intense tornadoes later this afternoon and evening, with some supercells with fire ahead of the line that's expected to form later this afternoon. We do have a 10% tornado risk from northeastern Missouri and eastern central Iowa back into southern Wisconsin and northwestern Indiana, and our 5% tornado risk extends from central and northern Missouri back into northern Indiana and central Illinois into central Wisconsin and much of the lower peninsula of Michigan, and we do have a Sig 1 area from eastern Iowa and northeastern Missouri back into much of the lower peninsula of Michigan, where we can see a few strong tornadoes later today, although the threat for strong tornadoes won't be as high as it is in the Sig 1, Sig 2 area, for our damaging wind risk for today. For the second time this year, and the first time in almost 3 months, we have a 60% damaging wind risk from eastern Iowa to northern Illinois and extreme southern Wisconsin. We do have a 45% damaging wind risk mainly from southwestern Michigan and eastern Iowa back into southern Wisconsin, and our 30% damaging wind risk extends mainly from northern Missouri and central and eastern Iowa back into much of the lower peninsula of Michigan, and we do have a Sig 1 area across most of that area, and if we were to, I wouldn't be surprised if they had a Sig 2 area across parts of the 45% or 60% damaging wind risk. If that would mean we could get an upgrade to a high risk of severe weather for damaging winds, which is super rare. Most of the time it's for tornadoes, but today we can see a high risk of severe weather for damaging winds, and if we get any major updates with a severe weather threat or anything later today, I will make another weather forecast sometime this afternoon or evening. Unfortunately, I can't go live for this, but make sure you have multiple ways to receive weather alerts today. We also have a 30% damaging wind risk across portions of the mid-Atlantic United States, and we do have a 50% damaging wind risk across much of West Virginia and much of Virginia back into southern and eastern Pennsylvania, much of New Jersey into southeastern New York, and western Connecticut, where you can see some scattered to widespread damaging wind gusts around 60 to 70 miles an hour later this afternoon. And now looking at our hail threat for today, the hail threat is much lower than the tornado and damaging wind threat, although we still do have a 15% risk area for hail from extreme northwestern Texas all the way back up into much of Missouri, all the way into much of the lower peninsula of Michigan, and we do have a Sig 1 area across northern Missouri, eastern and central Iowa, northern Illinois, and southern Wisconsin, where you can see some isolated to scattered large hail to very large hail this afternoon for the size of golf balls to baseball, so make sure you're still prepared for that. But that looks like a relatively low threat again compared to our tornado and damaging wind threat. Next, look at the day 1 excessive rainfall outlook from the Weather Prediction Center. You can see we have a slight risk of flash flooding from much of Iowa and northern Missouri back into northern Illinois, southeastern Minnesota, southern and central Wisconsin back into northern Indiana and western Michigan, where you can see some scattered flash flooding later today for supercells and potential derecho this afternoon and evening, and we could even see some isolated significant flash flooding, so make sure if you're in those areas you're also prepared For a decent flash flooding risk, this is a slight risk of excessive rainfall, and we do have a marginal risk of excessive rainfall from portions of northern Texas, much of Oklahoma, back into the Great Lakes area, all the way into much of the mid-Atlantic, and even into a sliver of the northeast United States. And we have another marginal risk of excessive rainfall across southwestern and south central Florida there. So make sure if you're in those areas that you do have multiple ways to receive flash flood warnings, but it doesn't look like it will be too significant in those areas because it's only a marginal risk, which means we're only expecting around a 5 to 15% risk of excessive rainfall later this afternoon and evening. Finally, looking at some of our weather models, starting with the 12Z HRRR, you can see if we go to about where we are now, you can see we have a MCS across much of central, moving to eastern Iowa right now. If we go a few hours into the future, you can see we will start to have some more initiation behind it across northern Missouri and southern Iowa. And if we go to around 18Z, you can already start to see some supercells forming with a little bit of convective initiation behind it. This will be the start of a tornado and damaging wind threat. You can see as we get into the future, we still have those supercells ahead of the line, but starting to become more linear as a line of storms there. We also do have a pocket of maybe some large hail and some strong wind gusts up in northern Illinois. And if we go farther into the future, we still have some of our supercells remaining, but this will mainly be a damaging wind threat by then, around 6 p.m. Central Time, and then by the time we get to around 0 to 01Z, you can see a big derecho potential there, mainly across northern Illinois back into western Michigan, although the line of thunderstorms extends so far south that it actually goes out of view here, so it's going to be several hundred miles long of thunderstorms, so this will be a very widespread event. You can still see some supercells ahead of the line, and as we go into the future, the potential derecho moves into eastern Indiana and central Michigan, and then eventually by the early morning tomorrow it moves into parts of Ontario and Ohio and gradually weakens before becoming non-severe and completely dissipating as we get towards 10 or 11Z tomorrow morning. Next, look at the 9Z wrap here. You can see, if we go to where we are now, you can see it has a widespread area of storms across basically the entire state of Iowa. Eventually, it has it moving east throughout the day, and then around 17 to 18Z, we have some storms forming across northeastern Kansas, southern Iowa, and northern Missouri. And then as we go later this afternoon, you can see it becomes a big time damaging wind threat. This is around 4 p.m. Central Time, and then by the time we get towards 7 p.m., you can see it becomes a widespread area of thunderstorms with some maybe leftover supercells there, with a potential derecho across northern Illinois into southern and central Wisconsin. And then by the time we get to 4Z tomorrow morning, you can see the line kind of splits into two areas there. So you can see you have one across central Illinois back into central Missouri, and another across southern Missouri back into southern Illinois and western Indiana. You can see by the time it enters Ontario and Ohio is starting to weaken already, and then by the time we get to around 11Z to 12Z, it's mainly a weak line with mainly some leftover small supercells and damaging wind segments. No tornado risk looks favorable tomorrow, however. Now, look at the NAM 3K. You can see, if we go to where we are about now, you can see it has some storms across western to eastern Iowa. Those will eventually clear out through the early morning into the early afternoon, or late morning, I mean. And then by 18Z, it has a widespread area of thunderstorms from western and northwestern Missouri back into central Iowa. And then by the time we get all the way to 21, you can see some supercells ahead of the line, and the line is getting more widespread. And by the time we get to 23, you can see a potential derecho across central and northern Illinois back into southern Wisconsin, and then eventually it moves over Lake Michigan into western Indiana as still a potential derecho with multiple building segments, and eventually by around 3Z tonight, It will weaken, likely still severe, but not derecho material anymore. Even by the time it moves it to Ohio and Ontario, it will be much weaker. There's only some scattered damaging winds left. And then by the time we get to around 7 or 8Z, it's basically almost completely gone with just a few isolated parts of the storm remaining. Anyways, that's the end of today's weather forecast. If you're in the enhanced, light, or moderate risks of severe weather for today, make sure you have multiple ways to receive tornado warnings and severe thunderstorm warnings, as well as flash flood warnings, as all hazards will be possible today, but the biggest hazards will be several strong to intense tornadoes and a potential derecho later this afternoon and evening. They may have a new weather forecast out this afternoon or evening if they have to make one. And unfortunately, I cannot go live because I kind of got banned from live streaming on my channel for no apparent reason by YouTube, and they would not unban me when they appealed it, so I just can't go live for a while. But hopefully I will see you in the next weather forecast. Goodbye.